Hey everybody, welcome back to the Billy Club, the show where we take a look at the final adventures of Marvel's yellow-bellied fear man.
Wait, no. He has one more. He's got one more.
The penultimate adventures of Marvel's yellow-bellied fear man. Which, of course, makes me Nico, and you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at NicoAction. It's NicoAction, as well as over on X's for Podcast.
I'm Tori Sheehan. You can find me on Twitter at Tori_Sheehan and on Instagram at SMTori. That's Tori with an I.
Well, we are here to discuss a truly unforgettable issue of Daredevil. And, you know, before we can even really get into Daredevil number 5, Daredevil versus the Matador, I just need to say that Matador really isn't a villain anymore. Like,
really?
Yeah, the last major Matador event I can remember was 2007.
I mean, is this because we don't do as many bull things, or is this like the slow evolution of interesting villains into anti-heroes?
I think it's a little bit that we don't actively seek to create new versions of culturally offensive characters. We occasionally, far too frequently, problematically hold on to really difficult to justify ones, but we don't really have any version of the Matador where everybody's like, do you remember where you were when you opened the book and saw the Matador? Like, I mean, we have stilt men, but we don't have Matadores. So I just want to start with, there's not that many adventures of this horrible character for us to get through.
I think also just because, like, I don't really get what makes him so special beyond the fact that, like, he's quick, I guess. He's a matador. He's apparently a pretty decent one.
Yeah.
And he's just, like, good with a cape, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
He doesn't have hypnotism. He doesn't have particular strength or speed or...
Now, I have to question if maybe that's a little bit what we're kind of still facing in this early era of Daredevil, the man without focus. Because, you know, early on, issue 1, he fights a crime boss. And, you know, the hardest part for me is every version of that story that somehow ultimately involves the Kingpin and Elektra and the Owl, they just make it so much better. But so, you know, we've got the Fixer, and then it's a borrowed villain. It's Electro. And then it's Purple Man, and it's Owl, and it's a borrowed villain in the Circus of Crime. And then it's the crime that Daredevil only appears as 2 heads in that issue of Spider-Man I made you read.
The worst crime.
Worst crime ever. Crime spree. So I feel like this is still kind of like no one knows how to fight Daredevil. Like,
it makes me think like they're like, of course we have to come up with with villains, and they're just like, we have to take from the bottom of the list because we don't know if the sales of Daredevil are that good yet. And so, like, it's one of those things where probably someone was like, in the first 10 issues you will have 2 like A-list kind of B-list kind of villains, and the rest are just going to be ones we already have, or a couple of new ones that mean nothing and maybe will strike something but probably won't.
And, you know, we're still in an era where, we're still in an era where that guy wears a big robot suit, Iron Man, and, you know, that villain of the X-Men, he's just going to be a real big guy. We're going to call him the Blob. And, like, you know, we're still, you know, Mr. Fear. Like, you know, we're still in very Excelsior days. So I think, you know, just add a little bit of context here. If you take a look at the last page of the Omnibus edition, or if you're just fucking like living that nachos life and you're Elektra back in these days and you're printing money, right? Her dad might have actually printed money at one point. Who knows? The back page tells us that also published the same month as Daredevil number 5 was Fantastic Four 34, Spider-Man 20, Avengers 11, Thor 111, Strange Tales 128, Tales of Suspense 61, Tales to Astonish 63. And those two were just listed as Suspense and Astonish. So I'm just kind of like, oh, eponymous, just like one name, just like self-titled, just like
so known.
Right? And then Sergeant Fury, for those who didn't realize, before Jim Steranko came in and said, you have never seen a cover like this. And of course, the most famous Jim Steranko, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. cover is actually the cover of the issue that's the reprint that doesn't contain his original art inside. So actually, that cover is the only part of the issue he did. Fucking fascinating. But so this is still back in the days before that when he's Sergeant Fury.
Oh, good for him. He got a promotion.
Yeah, big time. Oh god, so cool and looks so good. Ugh.
I bet.
Yeah. So
context. Like we're number 5 and everyone else is like at least 20 issues in. And Thor is 111 issues in. So that means he's almost like 10 years of this guy.
More like the same amount as, say, Fantastic Four. So what had happened at one point to Marvel in time was that Marvel was in a position where they could only print so many books because DC owned the physical printer. So they did a lot of Tales to Astonish and a lot of Tales of Suspense and a lot of Journey into Mystery. And when one thing really took over as the popular story, that's what the book became over time. So I'm pretty sure Tales of
Journey into Mystery turns into Thor,
right. It? Tales of Suspense, I believe, turns into Iron Man. Tales to Astonish, I want to say Tales to Astonish contained Ant-Man, but I might be mistaken on that. So it was a little bit unusual that a book like Daredevil or a book like, Uncanny X-Men got that kind of push. When you think about the books that got it, it was Avengers, who, while it didn't debut with Captain America, it had a number of other established characters, and then Cap came in a little bit down the line. You had Spider-Man, who was already proven and popular. Fantastic Four, the whole thing was built around them. But, giving someone like Daredevil or the X-Men, like these nobodies how do you sell that? It was really bold. And so it kind of makes sense that Daredevil's lagging a little bit.
That's fair. But does it have to lag so far into like weird, culturally insensitive villains? We really missed a great pun in this where I think they kind of show it where Daredevil and his horns is charging at the Cape, but I feel like we could have gotten a lot more like Matador grabbing him by the horns kind of stuff. I'm shocked that we did not get more of that.
Okay, so you know what? To jump in a little bit, I want to say that right off the bat, I fucking loved the en media res beginning of this issue. Matador, they're all talking about the Matador in an alternate universe. I feel like a really cool way to do this would have been to make the issue cover a newspaper headline about the Matador, and then the interiors be everything starting with Daredevil looking at that paper and being like, this fucking guy. That's
definitely like a today kind of version of it. So yeah, I'm also very fascinated that the letterer does not get a credit in this one. I presume it's our friend Sam Rosen.
I mean, it's gotta be. I think part of what happens is sometimes when you've got Stan Lee and Wally Wood, when even the cover says Daredevil reaches new heights under the pen of Wally Wood, it really creates an air that no one else kind of matters. Like, I can't imagine that now quite the same way. If it's like a big return, sure, but like these young guys were nobodies in so many ways. You know what I mean? The comics weren't a real thing yet, but to that end, I have a letter that I am going to read from the letters page of this book that, comics, the 60s were hard.
Yeah, they were.
So, one of the things that I noticed is that because we're told the Matador is already such a villain, when he shows up and sucks, I'm like, why do you have to suck so bad, dude?
I mean, apparently he lost one of his last fights, so like is apparently not as good as he thinks he is. I don't know. Is I guess maybe it's so interesting. I want to provide more metaphors into this, but sometimes I just have to remember like this is just what the plot has to be. But like the fact that both Daredevil and Matador sort of don't rock their first appearances as well as they should is an interesting parallel for these two, I guess.
And the idea that they both use red as a way of disguising who they are in a really obvious way because they're both technically still doing their job. There's a lot of layers to it, but there's not a lot of layers to the Matador. No. In a kind of distressing way. Like he really is as good as cultural appropriation of a costume. And it's troubling because I also find some of like this is a little bit I'm going to launch an engine at you with a tire logic still.
Yep.
Because it's a little bit a red cape. I don't know how to drive anymore.
I literally and like also like the fact that Matt gets so fucked up by the red cape. I was like, you can hear heartbeats. You know where he is.
Yeah.
Like what is going on? Plot is what's going on.
This is the first issue where I thought to myself, this took way too long because we start in media res and Daredevil's first, this reads like an episode of Batman from the 60s with how much happens. The good guy and the bad guy fight so many times. There's something real over the top to this issue that I don't think really, by the time Foggy's like, hey, Matt, do me a favor, bang Karen for me. By the time that whole exchange happens, I'm actually kind of already sour on Matt. Matt is almost behaving like Karen. Matador, I can't get him out of my head.
There's a lot of this. And I feel like, because the last time we saw him right before this it was Purple Man, it's Circus the Fear, it's Matador, and then next is going to be Mr. Fear. These are like 5 in a row of psychological villains for Daredevil. So like there is a part of me that's like, if we were seeing this series today, there would be an underlying arc throughout of Matt getting home at night and being like, it's been 4 dudes in a row and I'm fucking up and what's wrong with me? Like, why am I like this? Blah, 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 blah. And instead it's just like every time he's like, well, this is new. And we're like, is it though?
Is it? Because you don't seem to remember anything that happened. Like, this is at an era of continuity where Marvel is more likely to reference another book in this book than they are to reference this book in this book.
It's very interesting. And it also, I think, touches on the fact that I imagine that because of the publishing schedule, that means that these issues, it's not that they're like working like 8 issues ahead because they have the time. I think it's literally that they're not thinking about it until it's time for another one. And so I think it's a lot more disjointed. Like Stan Lee's like, I've done 4 Spider-Mans in the meantime, and we're doing one of these now. Like, you can't quite remember what's been going on beforehand.
Yeah, I completely get that, especially when like they had the copies they had. If they lost that copy, they had to hope they had another way to get it. Mm-hmm. And, the exchange between Foggy and Karen and Matt, it's kind of as stilted as the exchanges Matt has with Matador. The fight really doesn't go anywhere it doesn't go anywhere. It goes to the logical conclusion. And I sort of feel like we didn't need Foggy being like, Matt, take her. Yeah. That layer just reads weird to me. Is there any way that's not weird to read that layer?
Well, you see, with the Matador in town, Matt, and with him like flinging his cape around, who is he going up against? Daredevil. That makes Daredevil with his horns. The horns are the bull. The bull with the horns is going to put the horns on Foggy with cuckolding by taking Karen in his place to the party. And honestly, that's how we get to cucks. And I'm very unfortunate that I'm the one talking about cucks instead of you.
It is really unusual that I am not the one who's like, hey guys, bull chat here. Like, it's a little unusual. Yeah.
Also, like, Karen dropped probably like $120 in 1960s money for this Elizabeth Taylor, like, straight up from the movie set outfit. Like, my God.
You know, this is in that range of like, everybody's poor except when they're not.
Like, it's so fascinating. I do have to give it up for Wally Wood. Hot Matt is back. Hot Matt is very back. He looks very good. Back. He looks good. And he looks different from Foggy now, which is nice.
Karen, it's not just guy in a suit anymore.
Right. And I do have to say, like, there's a lot of detail put into these costumes at the party, and like all of these like background characters. Like, it all feels very right. You can understand why the Matador was able to just walk in, I guess. I also like that it sort of places where we are in this. That was like October 1964, probably. Yeah. Halloween. So it's only really been like, he's been swinging for 6 months now. So like he's got a little behind him.
A little groove.
Right. But like, it might also be the sophomore slump of like, do I know what I'm doing? So yeah, I think this is I think after coming off of the circus issue, like, we really amped up the love triangle. I think we're spending more time, we're giving a few more panels to the love triangle or love parallelogram, because to be honest, like, Daredevil is actually now a part of this, like, as a separate entity.
And just wait till there's Mike.
I know. Also, I got to give it up. We've got the double D on his chest now, so we've gone up a cup size. So kudos.
And don't forget, they're bound to become the two most famous initials in the world, as the book tells us.
It's true. I'm also like, Karen's not smart in that she's like, oh my God, there's a horrific stealer and thief, killer of men here. You hide in the closet, blind man. I'm gonna stay out and watch. Like, that's a choice on her part. And I know it's partially plot so that he can like disrobe and get back in, but like,
it's a displayed lack of self-preservation.
She has a lot of lack of self-preservation, and also like, I'm reading ahead a little bit, and it feels like whenever someone gets injured, all of a sudden Karen's like, my heart, how it beats for you. And I'm like, girl, you got a lot of issues, and I want to know like what background hell from, because I presume Karen's like from Ohio and came to the big city kind of deal. Like, doesn't feel like a Manhattan girl.
We're going to talk about it. We're going to go there. We're going to see her family.
Yeah. So like, I don't know what her deal is, but she has a lot of issues. Deep issues.
You know, and speaking of Karen and deep issues, the Cleopatra costume is like culturally by time less offensive, I guess, than the Matador costume. Sort of kind of like, you know, it's that joke of it's offensive to be like, look, I am that person of that culture, but it's not offensive. No, I said it backward because it's all offensive.
It's all offensive.
It's all offensive, but it's that thing where people try and justify it, where they're like, right, it's not offensive to be Mario. It's offensive to be an Italian, right? Like it's right. That thing. So I feel like this is Cleopatra. She's different.
Well, this is also that it's very obviously like Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra. Right. Like, it's one thing to be like, I'm dressing as Disney's Pocahontas versus what I think Pocahontas would look like as a 14-year-old girl forced into a marriage against her will.
And good thing that is not going to Marvel. Good Good call on
I saw that.
Pocahontas controversy there. Good
Oh,
job.
did they cut it?
Well, Jason Aaron apologized, and that's what I know from now. He's going to also be putting his pay from that book to charities, and I need to follow up and get more information. But what a silly move in the first place.
Good Lord. I saw that image and I was like, God dang.
Silly move.
But yeah, definitely like the Indian chief in the background of a lot of these party shots is way more offensive than Karen's Cleopatra outfit, but it's still, you know, sliding scale of things. There's obviously Lawrence of Arabia in here. Ugh, and, the 60s.
You know, but the 60s is also how Matt can blow up the Matador spot, being like, oh man, if someone was the Matador, they might want to rob the safe. You might see them.
Wasn't he saying that this is like a nice party, that like, wouldn't this be a party with security who might be like, hey bro, you're not on the list?
You know what? We only remember post both World Trade Center bombings. So we don't know what security was like in New York.
The mafia was still around. I feel like somebody had a guy at the door. Usually.
Somebody knew a Hell's Angel. Somebody somewhere.
They knew what security was. This wasn't like Giuliani showed up and was like, "Have you heard of locking doors?"
And Koch just out there being like, "Defend yourselves."
Also, Foggy's outfit is also looking very expensive.
Yeah, you know, Foggy looks so good.
He looks good, girl.
He looks good in this issue.
He looks good enough for Karen to be like, for me to be like, okay, Karen, I understand why you've decided this is a decent backup.
My notes literally say, damn, Foggy looks good.
Foggy's got thighs. He doesn't skip leg day.
Speaking of things that finally didn't get skipped, we got radar sense.
We did. Very exciting.
Finally, some radar sense. Finally, a little bit of what makes Daredevil. You know, it's hard to get those sorts of visual cues in early on, especially when the creators, you know, we're back in an age where the creators were like, how did he get his powers? Radar Tony Devilonium. And that's how he's got a devil radar. It's the radar of Satan.
I love it. I want to live in a world where someone decided that Daredevil gets his powers from a demon that possesses him the whole time, and he just hasn't known it.
We'll get to Shadowland.
We'll get there. I love that these children are bringing back the idea of Daredevil as a sarcastic name because he's so cowardly after dealing with the Matador.
What do you mean Daredevil got made a laughing stock? Did I? Growing up, my Aunt Debbie did not want us watching violent things, so she would edit down films. She had two VCR players hooked up, and she would like pause one and keep recording, play, and like. So I didn't know huge parts of films growing up. I thought the first Star Wars movie was like 34 minutes long. So, and like there was one lightsaber scene and it was mostly just on a desert planet till suddenly they were in this weird dark closet where they were fighting with like lightsabers. I was a little confused. She cut all the drinking, it was ridiculous. Anyway.
Oh, Debbie.
Oh, I know, right? So, I bring this up because sometimes when I would get older, I would be talking to people and they would say, well, you remember that part of that movie? And I would say,
this is like when people used to stop Sound of Music after they get married.
Yeah. People would be like, what do you mean E.T. is an hour long? And I'm like, no, E.T. is an hour long. And they're like, you know that's a much longer movie. And I'm like, no way. And like, so I had all of these memories where I'm like, I don't think we saw the same film. That's how I felt about everybody being like, DD got destroyed by the Matador. I'm like, did I just get Aunt Debbie?
You just got Aunt Debbie. You did.
Because that's not what I read. I just read them have a bad fight.
Yeah. But see, if you have a bad fight, all of a sudden you're not good at your job. I wish we applied that shit to like cops, you know?
To anyone. Everybody's always coming for meteorologists because sometimes they're like, it might rain. I heard the word might, but when the government accidentally wants all of the money because a period got put wrong in TurboTax, you know.
How's them taxes going?
You know, they go, especially when you file right away. So
good for you.
I also, the kids, on the subject of the kids being like, Daredevil. It's sort of like Matador vaguely beat Daredevil and flipped the polarity of the whole city. And now they all root for the villain. And I'm like,
New York's a tough town. Anyone on the Yankees will tell you, New York's a tough town.
Yeah. I mean, think about how many shows Sondheim couldn't mount toward the end of his life, you know?
Yeah.
It's a mean place when you surround yourself with cute boys, I guess.
We all have our season. I love the idea of stealing from a burglar alarm company. They're never gonna have work again.
Oh, right? Take down the man from within.
My goodness. So yeah, so much like how I was talking about how like the romance plot and villain plot are blended better together than usual. I would also like to talk about the fact that Foggy buys a 4.5 carat ring, which is obscene. Obscene.
I can't even imagine, like, even if it's the worst cut and the worst clarity, I just feel like at 4.5 carats, there's some black market kidneys involved in this situation.
Like there's like this has to be a family ring. Like he has to come from money, but like 4.5 carats. 4.5 carats is like
no money yet.
That's a celebrity ring, like a small celebrity ring, but like a celebrity ring.
I'm here for it. Like,
I mean, good for her. She deserves it. But
no, I mean, like this. I'm so sorry. I'm here for this analysis because I thought, hey, buddy, take my girl to this party. I'm gonna propose. Do you think Matt, do you think I should propose and then show her the ring? Or Matt, do you think I should bribe her, then ask the question when she's weak? Like, I didn't like anything that happened.
I mean, it's so interesting because like the 50s and 60s is when like they really kicked into the idea of like you should be spending 3 months paycheck on your ring, and so that it's a physical understanding of how much you make, because she might not know how much you make, and they used to have shorter courtships, I guess, back in the day. And so like this was a way of saying like, I have money, this is what I can do. And so like when he's like, so like, yes, I understand that what he means by bait and hook of just like you show her the ring and then she's like, oh, you're like more loaded than I thought. And then he can be like, yeah, babe, I can give you the walls and the house and the peaches and cream that you're looking for. So like I get it, but like at the same time, like, bro, like if you're there's so many things wrong with this. I can't even begin on the Foggy side. I can provide like the socioeconomic idea, but like getting into like the actual like, Foggy, how many dates have you gone on with this girl? 1.5? How many of them do you remember? Because the major one, the circus one, you don't remember any of it.
Right. And, there's a lecherous sense. And like, I understand by a zeitgeist.
Yeah.
It was a sense of care. And I am not casting judgments on any relationship built in an era where the cultural zeitgeist was predominantly such that this was appropriate. But we live in an era where it's different, and where there's expectations of propriety, and Foggy's a fucking creep, and like he's a nice creep. He is the nicest hey there Delilah creep ever. But like, he is a hey there Delilah creep.
Yeah. And because here's the thing, he's not going to want you to work at the office once you're married. That's not happening. So that means they're going to need another secretary.
But that one's for Matt.
But will she be?
Will she be?
Because not all girls are into the blind broken bird thing. Some girls are going to be like, oh, he gave his wife a 4.5 carat ring.
Maybe I'll get an apartment. Right? You know? Is that what it is? The girl gets the apartment?
The apartment, or like, usually it's I'm going to fuck him till he leaves her kind of deal. I mean, you know, it works for some people.
No judgment. You know, it's such, I'm grimacing at the culture.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
not
no,
so
like
much any one person involved in just the culture of it, that this is an indoctrination that women believed was the highest they could achieve as a lot in life, just feels to me so anathema to the strength of the women that raised me. Like, it feels so impossibly opposite of the same world that gives me Electra as well. So like, it's just
but
so
we're also
hard
like,
to hear.
We're also looking at the fact that like our parents, when my mom turned 18, 1974 was the year you could finally get across the board credit cards and checking accounts in your name. That's the year that it's law.
Women cannot be told no without a man.
Right. And so like, I know for my mom, like, she doesn't know what it's like to live in a world paying rent in a checking account that has your dad's name on it because you couldn't open it on your own. And so like, but that's the world that Karen is living in.
Wow.
Like, Karen is probably living in one of those, like, I think you saw it in Agent Carter. I think she lives in one of those houses where there's like an older woman and like a pool and a bunch of ladies, a bunch of working girls who live.
Excuse me. I've watched Mad Men.
Pardon. Yes. Okay. So yeah, you get it.
Because there's that one guy who's so hot.
Right. Yeah. But like that and those houses still exist. There are still those houses in New York City that are just like, there is a caretaking woman and everyone who lives in the building is a young woman, professional career. And part of living in that building is breakfast is at 8:00 so you can get to work. Dinner is at 6 so you come home from work, and you're like, there's no men, there's no distractions, there's no kids, there's no like none of this. Like, it's just like a safe place for women to live in the city and not be harassed by men.
Wow.
On their way to getting married. And so like, that's the world that Karen's living in. Anyway, sorry.
No, I needed to know that, because like, you know, I sometimes think I maybe make light of how little I loved or respected Karen growing up. I, you know, hated her. Like,
well, she's also being written through the lens of two dudes who've never thought about it before.
Yeah.
They've never thought of like what a working woman in the 60s is like. And so she's also a very idealized Donna Reed-esque like kind of gal who just happens to work in the office with you.
Okay.
So, but like, for us reading it from her and for people who slowly join in, like, once like Innocenti gets in, like Innocenti would understand what Karen was living in at the time that these were being written. And so, and
you know, I kind of feel like I always told myself Karen gets cool after Born Again, and you know, I tell myself that like anything's not Heather Glenn, you know.
Oh God.
Anything isn't Debbie Nelson.
Oh anything God, Debbie Nelson is coming.
Debbie Nelson.
Oh God.
And like,
let's talk about how Foggy is as a husband.
Awful. And like, you know, I feel like one of the things that's, because like the Matador is defeated in this issue in the dumbest way.
Yeah.
Matt looks up previous Matadors in the international sports pages on microfiche, and you know, he finds this Matador, puts out that Matador is Daredevil, even, and they were like, can you prove that? No, they fucking fought in public!
But that was a hired actor. You see, we've always had these crisis actors since the 60s. Honestly, was JFK even assassinated, or was that some kind of giant plot to make sure that we didn't realize that like Catholics were taking over the world?
It's actually a transformer. It's not a car, and the transformer whisked him away to safety.
Yep. And then you find out that he's actually just Fidel Castro, just shaving his beard every so often. And then you're just like, is Marilyn Monroe even a person, or is she just kind of like some sex robot that we put out early and she just like malfunctioned one day?
She was an original transformer, and she transformed into a scooter because she was so little.
Got to ride her all around.
So that's what a weird tangent.
So anyway, real quick before we get back into the Matador, the words. So after Foggy like is like, should I do this? How should I propose? Blah 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 blah. Matt's like, oh no, my best friend, my partner wants to marry the same girl as I do. And then the next word out of his mouth is, how can I propose to her now? Why did Foggy have to tell me? Matt. What is he doing? What is he thinking? Love is blind, but like apparently it's also like bad at reading situations.
I can't find where there was any references to him proposing anywhere.
Oh, you want to look at the mid-12?
Oh no, I mean like
before that, they're none. As a matter of fact, the first time he says I'm into Karen is literally in the circus issue. Before that, he's just like, she's awful pretty. She smells real good. Foggy's so into her. She could never love someone like me. And then in the circus issue, he's like, I'm a little into you. And he comes back into this and he goes, how could I propose to her now that Foggy will? And I'm just like, bro, you like swan dived. No fear swan dived into love, I guess.
And that's one of the major themes of Daredevil. For the rest of the series, it's actually two things from this issue. It's inexplicable multiple partner complications, and it's who is Daredevil and how does the media play into that. Mm-hmm. And those are two very, very major themes for the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. Specifically, this whole idea of multiple women, there is always Elektra. And there is kind of always a little bit Black Widow forever at this point. Like, they'll always love each other, I guess. But it's a very interesting thing to see plotted out by issue 5.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because like later on when Matt starts like playing the field and getting more girls, he gets a little smoother. Right now, he's still very dry, very like doesn't talk, doesn't do much, like just like dead zone. And so for me, like for that personification that he puts forward to include the idea of like, and he's a player. You're like, I don't get it. So yeah. The Matador fight and the Matador backstory, like, it's all very by the numbers and like, I don't know. I'm very fascinated by how Matt decides to put that story in the paper and like how upset Foggy is and like how strange this must seem to Foggy. Like a lot of Matt's actions in this must seem very strange to Foggy.
And how long we go without Foggy finding out is already hard for me because I'm already stressed by a lot of the sort of needless back and forthing. And the pacing on this issue is probably the worst pacing by far.
Yes.
Because everything we've talked about has been in 3 clumps of 4 pages. And then there's just been a lot of fighting in between in a way that has not supported the length of the issue.
Yeah. For all that, I'm like, wow, like we're really integrating the romance plot like better. That's not what's fucking up the pacing. it's the fact that like the Matador isn't that interesting unless he's beating up Daredevil. Like there's nothing interesting about him flipping over a fence is the most we get out of him, where it isn't an actual fight between him and Daredevil. So there's outside of his backstory, there's very little him monologuing at anyone. Like there's very little like just Matador. It's always just punch, fight. And to be honest, the drawing of how Daredevil fights right now is a little static and not as interesting to look at. And when the Matador is such a, I don't want to say boring, but cheesy fight to have because he's just a cape.
Yeah. And,
like, it's not as interesting as other fights have been.
I don't want to, uncorrect your correction of yourself, but I do think he's kind of boring. Like, if you tell me I'm going to a car stunt show and the car stunt is the car goes forward in a straight line at like 30 miles an hour, and then the car goes backward in a straight line at about 30 miles an hour and then stops, I guess that's a stunt. It's technically a stunt. You didn't lie, but that's not a very exciting stunt. Just because you can claim something like this is a fighting style, that doesn't make it a fighting style. Not everything translates across ideas like that, So I think perhaps disposing of the Matador as comfortably and readily as they do is pretty useful. Ultimately, I think this issue is fine. It's not great. It's just sort of par for the course. I'm more excited about getting to where we're going to get to, but at the moment, I'm not annoyed by this issue as much as I'm troubled by the problematic treatment of cultural heritage back in the 60s.
Yes. Like the Matador stuff, I wish you could just like sip, because a lot of the other stuff going on is deeply interesting. And I really do like it. I also, to me, I think the Matador isn't also that smart, because to me, if you're looking for Daredevil and you show up in a law office owned by Matt Murdock and there's Daredevil sitting there, like there are two names on the door. Which one is it? Like,
right. I don't think it's the and.
Yeah, I don't think it's the and I think it's probably the guy who put the thing in the newspaper. Like, I'm very shocked that like Matador didn't walk into Daredevil doing his very best, like future Kingpin, like, it's me, I'm Daredevil, and be like, so Murdock, like, why are you in horns?
So what's with the fake blind thing?
Like, you want to chat about it? Like, are you actually blind? Like, let's like man to man, mask to mask. So yeah, and also just like, it's fine. There's a fun like the fire escape fight would probably be gorgeous, like visually more. I feel like the fact that it only takes up one page, like it's kind of framed weird.
There's a lot of reliance on grid here.
There's a lot of reliance on grid. I'll be very happy when we snap out of that. But I will say I'm glad that the fire escape fight allows the people to kind of be like, get him, Daredevil, and like he can feel the belief in him shore him back up, because I guess Daredevil also sort of gets like part of his power from the belief of the people around him again, which we've been talking about a lot on other things on X's for Podcast. But he sort of does need the love of the people to be his best.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I mean, it's not like a definitive ability.
No.
It's definitely something that we see time and time again. Without a Hell's Kitchen to protect, Daredevil becomes really lost.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of these stories they feel so middled and they feel so padded that when we do have like a big splash pinup at the end, it's just like, this should have been part of I'm starting to realize that this should have been like stories to bedevil, and it should have had 3 stories, and Daredevil should have been like a 10-page A plot.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that is something that would have, or if we got like 3 shorts, like 3 8-page shorts in it, I think that would be better. for the story. And probably what we would have, like, if they were to introduce something like this now, like this would be something where it would be like a bunch of shorter ones to kind of get the vibes going.
I would love his pal Foggy Nelson and his law stories, and his girl Karen Page, Lady Adventure Secretary stories. I don't know what they would have given her, but if Lois and Jimmy can have comics, I don't see any reason that Karen and Foggy can.
Oh, Foggy 100% could have just like the bumbling law nonsense as Daredevil is like flipping around behind him. Like it's one of those of just like
He's always
in
got
the
a donut.
background. Yeah, it's one of those. And then Karen's is very much just like the dating life of Karen, where you like reveal that every other man that she goes out with is like just the worst bro ever. And so like that's why Foggy and Matt are a thing. Or even like she accidentally goes out with like the ox without knowing it.
I love it.
Like all of that. Like there has to be a reason why Karen is so focused in on these two and like not trying anything else. That like, I don't know. Also, like, Matt's Catholic. I can guarantee you Karen's not. Like, she's got to have some kind of feeling about that.
Right? Because this is in an era where Catholic was like a term.
Yeah. Like this was the height of like, I mean, I guess Kennedy was already elected, but like, where people were like, Catholics, they serve an American power kind of deal. But yeah, I mean, this is the parallelogram is the love parallelogram is continuing. Foggy's getting the worst corner of it.
Always.
He's the most obtuse angle of them all. And that's mostly what I have to say about this. Any lasting impressions, Nico?
Well, my most lasting impression actually comes from the letters page.
Yes, tell me more.
Now, in the back of Daredevil number 5, back in December of 1964, Dennis Millard from 89 Carter Lane in Plantsville, Connecticut, wrote in and said, "Dear Stan," ooh, dear.
Ooh.
"I've just gotten my hands on the newest issue of Daredevil, and it's terrific. I have a Daredevil club with only 7 members. The only thing wrong is that my English teacher just grabbed my comic, and now he's reading it. He's smiling. Now I've got 8 members. Hurry. Oh, I'm sorry. Hooray. I'm on the good side of my teacher at last." Every sentence or so is punctuated by an exclamation point. There is no way Stan Lee didn't write this to himself.
100% wrote that to himself. That's exactly how he thinks teenagers write. Talk. He's smiling. My goodness.
You're live tweeting this?
Into a typewriter?
Into a typewriter? You're live tweeting this?
A teacher in Ohio is going to take your comic book and enjoyingly read it.
And then join his student club? Look, I know the 60s were different. Like, so I had this math.
7 boys.
I had this math teacher that used to, she was nuts, right? And like, we had her right as she was retiring. And she's like, "You might not believe me, but up until like 1989, 1990, I used to just take my smoking breaks with the students. And, if you could give me a cigarette during my smoking break, if I forgot my cigarettes, I'd give you extra credit. It was no big deal."
Times were different.
So maybe it's that different that you can like join your boy comic club. No.
You know what? Good for Stan Lee. It's always nice to get the advice column started with something that really shows you at your best light.
Well, speaking of our best light, I am very excited to come back and talk about Mr. Fear next time.
Oh my God.
Like, if Daredevil is the man without fear, giving him a villain named Mr. Fear, I only wish this guy was called Mr. Fear, the man who devils to dare, or whatever, because it's such a perfect villain. So I'm thrilled. And, there's also Ox, and I think Ox is pretty hot. So I'm in.
You would.
I would. I really would. So I'm in. I'm excited. And until then, I'm Nico, and you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Nico Action, as well as over on X's for Podcast, over on Twitter at X's for Podcast.
And I'm Tori. You can find me on Twitter at Tori_Sheehan and on Instagram at SMTori. That's Tori with an I.
And until next time,
stay
fearless.
Yeah.
We did it that time.
We did it.
Yeah.